My sister and I took a DNA test for fun, but found out we don't share any genes. My twin sister and I have always been close. We rarely fought, always supported each other, and even though we're fraternal twins, it didn't stop us from feeling like we were two halves of the same whole. A few months ago, our grandparents suggested we take DNA tests. They thought it'd be a fun experiment to see what we inherited from our family. Grandma always talked about our Croatian roots, and Grandpa loved joking about our German genes. My sister and I thought it sounded interesting, so we agreed. Grandpa even paid for both kits. When the results came back, my sister was thrilled. Her results were exactly what we expected. 50% Croatian, with some Austrian and German ancestry mixed in. It all made sense, given what we knew about our family history. And then I opened my results. At first, I thought there must have been a mistake. None of my results matched hers. There was no Croatian, no German, no Austrian ancestry. Instead, nearly everything was Scandinavian, with a small mix from regions completely absent in my sister's results. But the most shocking part? We had no DNA matches at all. Zero. My sister laughed it off. "It's definitely a mistake," she said. "They must have mixed up your sample with someone else's." Her calm attitude helped me relax a little, and we decided to contact the testing company. They apologized and offered to retest us for free. We both sent in new samples, being extra careful this time to follow every instruction. But when the second set of results came back, I couldn't deny the truth anymore. They were identical to the first. No shared DNA. No explanation. When the second set of results came back identical to the first, my sister still tried to reassure me. "These tests aren't perfect," she said. "There's got to be some kind of error. Maybe the company messed up again." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Two identical results? That's not a coincidence. I kept replaying everything in my mind. We share the same birthday. We grew up together. Our baby pictures are side by side on the mantle in our parents' house. How could it be possible that we don't share any DNA? We decided to tell our grandparents, hoping they'd take it more seriously. But when I told them my results were completely different from my sister's, they barely reacted. "That's interesting," Grandpa said with a shrug. "Maybe there's something wrong with the tests," Grandma added. And that was it. No follow-up questions, no concern. They quickly changed the subject. My sister insisted we talk to our parents next. She thought we should gather all the results and ask if anyone else in the family had done a DNA test before. I hesitated. I was scared of what their reaction might reveal. But my sister pushed me, so we sat her mom down. "Mom, we need to talk about something," my sister began. Before we even explained, I could see the worry on Mom's face. When we told her about the DNA results, her response was strange. She sighed, but it wasn't a sigh of surprise or concern. It was more like irritation. "Those tests are inaccurate anyway," she said. "Your grandparents never should have suggested it." "But this isn't just one mistake," I said. "We don't share DNA, Mom. That's impossible for twins." She waved it off. "You shouldn't stress over this. Just drop it, okay?" Her reaction confused me even more. Why wasn't she shocked? Why wasn't she asking questions? When we told Dad, his response was even worse. He just nodded and said, "It doesn't prove anything. Don't worry about it," before going back to whatever he was doing. I tried to convince myself there was some logical explanation, but my doubts kept growing. If it wasn't a mistake, then what did it mean? Could I have been adopted? But if I was adopted, why would they take in a baby that was the exact same age as my sister? How would they even find me? And if I am adopted, why would they keep it a secret for 18 years? The hardest part was thinking about my sister. If we're not related, then who is she to me? And who am I to her? After our parents avoided the conversation, I couldn't shake the feeling that something big was being hidden from me. My sister kept saying I was overthinking, but I couldn't let it go. One night, when I was home alone, I decided to do something I hadn't considered before. I called the hospital where my mom had given birth to us. I remembered the name because she often mentioned how difficult her labor had been. The call was nerve-wracking. I wasn't even sure if they'd give me any information, but I felt like I had to try. "Hi," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "My mom gave birth at your hospital 18 years ago. She had twins. I was wondering if you have any records of that." The woman on the phone was polite and asked for the date and my mom's name. I heard her typing on a keyboard, and then she said something that made my stomach drop. "We have a record for your mom on that date, but it only lists one birth. Just one baby girl." Are you sure? I asked, my voice shaking. She had twins, 2 girls. No, the record only mentions one, she said. I thanked her and hung up, but my hands were trembling. This didn't make any sense. That night, I barely slept. Everything I thought I knew about my life suddenly felt like a lie. If the hospital's record showed only one baby, then I couldn't have been born with my sister. So how did I end up here? I started thinking about all the little things I'd never paid much attention to before. Like how my mom always talked about how hard her labor was, but she never mentioned the moment we were both born. Or how I had far fewer baby pictures than my sister. And then there was the fact that I've always been told I don't look much like my family. My hair is much lighter than everyone else's. My height is way above average for our family, and I'm much more athletic. I used to brush it off as just random genetics, but now it felt like a clue. What scared me even more was the idea of people finding out. My sister started talking about the DNA results with her boyfriend, and I begged her not to tell anyone else. She didn't understand why I was so upset. It's just a weird mystery, she said. Why are you making such a big deal out of it? But to me, it wasn't just a mystery. It felt like my entire identity was falling apart. I was terrified that if people found out, they'd see me as an outsider, as someone who didn't belong. I even started questioning my own birthday. Was it even mine? Or did I inherit someone else's life? After the call with the hospital, I couldn't keep pretending everything was normal. The pieces weren't adding up, and the silence from my family only made it worse. It felt like everyone knew something I didn't, and I was the only one left in the dark. One night at dinner, I decided to bring it up again. I couldn't sit there pretending like nothing was wrong anymore. Mom, Dad, I said, trying to steady my voice, we got the results from the second DNA test. They were the same. My mom looked up, but there was no surprise on her face. Just annoyance. My dad kept eating, not even acknowledging what I'd said. And my mom finally said, and I called the hospital, I continued. They only have a record of one birth that day, not twins. This time, my mom set down her fork with a sharp clink. Why would you do that? She snapped. Because I need to know the truth. I said, my voice breaking. If this is some kind of mistake, just tell me. But if it's not, I deserve to know. My mom stared at me for a long moment before glancing at my dad. He didn't look up. He just pushed his plate away and left the room without a word. When my parents refused to give me answers, I decided to try my grandparents. If anyone could shed some light on this, it had to be them. I went to their house the next day and sat down with them in the kitchen. I didn't sugarcoat anything. Do you know anything about my birth? I asked. The DNA tests say my sister and I aren't related, and the hospital only has a record of one birth. What's going on? For a moment, I thought they might actually tell me. They exchanged a glance that was impossible to miss. But then my grandma sighed and said, don't let those tests get in your head. They just make life more complicated. But that doesn't explain anything. I shot back. My grandpa chimed in. What matters is that you grew up in a good family. Isn't that enough? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So you do know something? I asked, my voice shaking. Grandma pressed her lips together, and Grandpa shook his head. We can't talk about this, he said simply. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what my grandparents said, or didn't say. My sister begged me to drop it, saying it wasn't worth all this stress. But how could I? The more they tried to avoid the truth, the more certain I became that they were hiding something huge. I spent hours on the computer that night, searching for answers. I read about hospital mix-ups, baby swaps, and even cases of babies being taken home by the wrong families. It felt surreal, like something out of a movie. I don't know where this is going, but I know I can't stop now. The truth is out there, and I'm terrified of what it might be. I feel like I'm standing at a crossroads. On one hand, I need to know the truth. It's eating away at me. On the other hand, I'm terrified that once I find out, I won't be able to go back to the life I thought I had. After the conversation with my grandparents, I couldn't focus on anything. My sister kept telling me to let it go. She thought it was better not to push, but I couldn't. Something about their silence confirmed my worst fears. They knew something, and they weren't telling me. I decided to take the next step. I reached out to an organization that helps people find their biological parents. I explained my situation, and they recommended I request my official birth records. When I got the copy of my birth certificate, I was expecting answers, but instead, I got more questions. Under Mother, my mom's name was listed. That was a relief, even if only for a moment. But under father, the space was blank, completely empty. And then I noticed something else. In the corner of the document, there was a note indicating that my registration date was several days after my sister's. I didn't know what that meant, but it didn't feel like a coincidence. I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. I confronted my mom again, this time when we were alone in the house. I walked into the kitchen and put the birth certificate on the table in front of her. I know something happened, I said, my voice trembling. This says I wasn't registered the same day as my sister, and there's no father listed. I need you to tell me the truth. She stared at the paper, her hands trembling slightly. For a moment, I thought she might deny it again, but then she sighed deeply and said, "You deserve to know, but I didn't want you to find out this way." Her words hit me like a truck. I braced myself for what was coming. "You weren't born for me," she said finally, "but we didn't want you to ever feel different, so we decided to raise you as our own." I couldn't even speak. I just stared at her, waiting for her to continue. She explained that the day she gave birth to my sister, there was a tragedy. My sister's twin didn't survive. But in the same hospital, there was another baby, a newborn whose parents couldn't take care of her. That baby was me. I don't know how to process this. On one hand, I'm grateful. My parents gave me a home, a family, and love when I could have had nothing. But on the other hand, I feel like my entire life has been a lie. My sister tried to comfort me when I told her. She said, "You're still my sister. Nothing changes that. We grew up together. We'll always be family." Her words helped, but they didn't erase the confusion I feel. Should I try to find my biological parents? What if I don't like what I find? For now, I'm just taking things one step at a time. My mom and I are starting to talk more openly, but it's hard. Every time I look at my family, I wonder how much of what I know about myself is real. I don't have all the answers yet, but I know this. No matter where I came from, the people who raised me are my family, and that has to count for something. Update. A lot has happened since I posted the original story. Things have been intense, to say the least. I didn't expect my world to flip upside down so quickly, and honestly, I'm still trying to process everything. After my mom admitted the truth about my adoption, I thought I'd feel some kind of closure, but instead, I felt more confused than ever. The idea that I wasn't biologically related to the people I've called my family for 18 years, it was like I didn't know who I was anymore. My mom and I had a few long talks in the days after her confession. She told me everything she could about the day I was born, but it wasn't much. She said the adoption was done quietly because my biological parents wanted no contact. They were young and overwhelmed, and my mom and dad were in the right place at the right time. But here's the kicker. When I asked for more details about my biological parents, like their names or where they were from, my mom hesitated. She said she didn't have that information, which makes me think the adoption wasn't as straightforward as she claims. I tried asking my dad, but he's been even more distant about the whole thing. He says he did what was best for the family and doesn't want to dig up the past. It feels like he's shutting down every time I bring it up. My sister has been a rock through all of this, but I can tell it's been hard for her too. She's always seen us as equals, as twins. But now, we're navigating this strange reality where we're not biologically connected. We've had a few tearful conversations about it. She told me she's scared of how this might change things between us. I told her it wouldn't, it couldn't. We grew up together. We shared every moment of our lives. Nothing about that has changed. But here's where it gets complicated. She told her boyfriend about everything. And now I'm worried that this secret might not stay a secret for long. I don't blame her for wanting to vent, but I'm terrified of people treating me differently if they find out I'm not really part of the family. I decided I couldn't leave it there. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I needed to know where I came from. Even if my biological parents didn't want contact back then, maybe things have changed. I reached out to the hospital again and asked if they had any additional records tied to my adoption. They told me they couldn't release any further information without legal authorization. That's when I realized this was going to be more complicated than I expected. Now I'm looking into hiring a lawyer to help me get access to those records. I've also been considering taking another DNA test with a different company, one that specializes in connecting people with biological relatives. It's scary. What if I find out something I don't want to know? But I can't stop myself from wondering. Emotionally, it's been a lot to handle. I've started journaling to try and make sense of my thoughts. Some days, I feel grateful for my family and everything they've given me. Other days, I feel lost, like I'm floating in this in-between space where I don't fully belong anywhere. My mom keeps checking in on me, and I can tell she's trying. She's apologized a few times for not telling me sooner, and I believe she genuinely thought she was protecting me. But it's going to take time for me to fully process everything. My sister and I are still as close as ever. She's made it clear that no matter what happens, I'm her sister, and nothing will change that. I hold on to that every time I start to spiral. Right now, I'm focusing on taking things one step at a time. I've started researching how to access adoption records and looking into therapy to help me navigate these feelings. I'm not ready to reach out to potential biological relatives yet, but it's something I'm keeping in the back of my mind. This whole experience has been overwhelming, but it's also made me realize how strong the bond with my family really is. Even though I'm not biologically related to them, they're still my parents, and my sister will always be my sister. That's the one thing I know for sure.